It was supposed to be a standard patrol, nothing more than a routine show of presence along one of the world's most volatile borders. On November 14, 2023, at 16:42 local time, the Israeli Defense Forces lost all contact with one of their most formidable machines, a Merkava 4 main battle tank and its 4-man crew. Leading the patrol was Captain Eitan Lavi, 29, a decorated tank commander from Beersheba with nearly a decade of combat experience and the kind of quiet intensity that made others follow without question. The mission was straightforward, a sector sweep near the Kasufim Gate, close enough to Gaza to keep things tense, but far enough not to expect surprises. That assumption wouldn't survive the day. A mild sandstorm had rolled in from the Sinai, obscuring visibility and distorting GPS signals. Still, the Merkava was built for this, equipped with independent thermal sights, redundant navigation systems, and encrypted radio links. But at 17:03, radio contact dropped. No warning. No distress call, just static. Within minutes, all telemetry from the tank vanished. Not a flicker. The unit, following 3 kilometers behind, reached the rendezvous point 20 minutes later. Nothing. No tank, no tracks, no sounds, only dust and silence. Initial speculation offered little comfort. Maybe the tank hit a mine and was instantly disabled. Maybe a technical malfunction had knocked out all comms. Maybe, though it seemed far-fetched, a well-coordinated ambush had neutralized the vehicle and captured the crew before they could respond. But if that were true, where were the signs? No blast crater, no shredded treads, no oil, no debris. The area was combed within the hour, and it was as if the Merkava had never existed. The idea of a 65-ton tank vanishing in broad daylight bordered on absurd. Yet that's exactly what happened. Within 24 hours, the IDF locked down the entire sector. Checkpoints sprang up. Surveillance drones filled the skies. Analysts reviewed every signal intercept for clues, but there was nothing. Eitan Lavi, his crew, and the most advanced tank in Israel's arsenal had disappeared into the sand without a trace and without a sound. The mission to find the missing Merkava 4 was given a codename within 36 hours, Operation Iron Echo. Officially, it was a high-priority search and recovery effort. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. Embarrassment, confusion, panic, carefully concealed behind military protocol. Tanks don't just vanish. Not in the middle of a controlled border zone. Not under watch from satellite and drone, but this one had. And the implications were terrifying. Resources were poured in like water on fire. Surveillance UAVs blanketed the region, their infrared eyes combing the ground for heat signatures. Bedouin trackers with years of desert wisdom were flown in from the Negev, their job to spot what satellite imagery couldn't. Signals intelligence units scoured the ether for encrypted comms, burst transmissions, anything that hinted at a covert abduction or digital attack. Helicopters flew grid patterns for 72 hours straight. None of it mattered. The Merkava had left no trail. It wasn't until the 4th day that a faint glimmer of a lead emerged. Near Wadi al-Shati, a dry riverbed just 11 kilometers southeast of the tank's last known position, a UAV picked up something unusual. Faint indentations in the sand, too wide for a jeep, too narrow for a bulldozer. Tank tracks. But just as quickly as they appeared, they ended. No turn, no stop, just nothing. As if the Merkava had lifted off and vanished into the sky, that discovery raised more questions than answers. Why would the tank veer off course without radioing in? Why didn't it trigger any of the automated alert systems? And most disturbing of all, why was there no mayday? These were hardened soldiers trained to fire, fix, and fight through anything. They weren't green recruits. They wouldn't just go silent. Analysts began whispering about electromagnetic pulses, GPS spoofing, even psychological warfare. But none of it made sense. The systems on board were hardened, the area supposedly secure. And yet, The reality was unavoidable. The Merkava before had become a ghost in the sand. No enemy claimed responsibility, no footage surfaced. And as days turned to weeks, a grim realization began to settle across the command chain. This wasn't just a tactical anomaly. It was something far worse, the beginning of a mystery no one was prepared to solve. To understand the weight of what went missing that day in November 2023, you have to understand what the Merkava 4 really is. It isn't just a tank, it's a mobile fortress, a 65-ton steel organism designed to dominate modern battlefields and keep its crew alive in the deadliest conditions. The armor is modular, reactive, and layered like a second skin. Its trophy system can detect incoming RPGs and neutralize them mid-air before they strike. The fire control computer is one of the most advanced in the world. Thermal optics, encrypted comms, remote-operated machine guns, it's less a vehicle than a weaponized ecosystem. And yet, it vanished. Just like that. Inside, the crew lives in a space tighter than a small kitchen. 4 men: commander, gunner, loader, and driver. Eitan Lavi was the kind of officer others trusted without hesitation. Calm under fire, relentless in training. He ran his crew like a precision instrument. His gunner, Sergeant Neve Halevi, had served with him for 2 years. They moved as one in combat drills. The loader, Corporal Omri Ben Ari, youngest of the crew, had just been transferred in. And the driver, Private Dord Zur, known for his nerves of steel, could thread a Merkava through a corridor with inches to spare. Together, they were tight, professional, disciplined. There were no weak links. The last data ping from the tank was logged at 17:01. Surveillance drone logs show it moving as expected along Route 237. But then, something odd. A slight veer south just 10 degrees off its planned path. Not enough to raise alarms at the time, but significant in hindsight. Then nothing. The next frame is empty terrain. The tank disappears from the feed as if it blinked out of existence. That moment, the veer, the silence, has become the focal point of every investigation since. Did Eitan see something? A threat? A lure? Was he ordered to divert? Or did something interfere with navigation? The crew never radioed a status change. The tracking systems, triple redundant, all failed simultaneously. Every angle has been dissected. None explain how the most advanced tank in the IDF simply ceased to exist. The answer wasn't in the equipment. It was in the silence and what came after. By the end of the second week, silence had become more dangerous than noise. The IDF wasn't just looking for a missing tank anymore, it was managing a narrative, one that was beginning to unravel. The public wanted answers, so did the press. And behind closed doors, senior officials were demanding to know how a multi-million-dollar war machine and 4 trained soldiers could disappear within spitting distance of the border. Initially, the theory that gained the most traction was GPS spoofing, a known tactic used by Iran and its regional proxies. But digital forensics ruled it out. The Merkava's inertial navigation system is independent of satellite signals. Even if GPS was compromised, the tank wouldn't have lost all comms or telemetry. That left something darker. Electronic warfare, possibly high-frequency jamming. Not crude, off-the-shelf equipment. Military-grade, sophisticated, coordinated, but again, no signal traces, no proof. Only a hole where data should have been. Outside military circles, the rumors spun faster. Hamas had captured the crew and the tank in a surgical ambush. Hezbollah had crossed through Sinai tunnels and launched a black flag operation. Some even whispered the unthinkable: defection. That Eitan had gone rogue, driven by ideology or madness, and led his crew into enemy hands. It was baseless and cruel, but it spread like gasoline. Inside the Knesset, tensions reached a boil. Members of the opposition accused the government of covering up a strategic failure. The defense minister held a press conference denying all wild theories and promising full transparency while offering nothing. Classified briefings were leaked. Internal memos surfaced. At one point, an unnamed Mossad official was quoted anonymously in an international outlet. "This isn't just about a tank, it's about what else might be missing with it." And through it all, the families waited. Mothers clutching silence like a wound. Fathers staring at phones that didn't ring. Eitan's sister posted a photo of his last text. "Off to drill, all quiet." It went viral. But quiet had become the enemy. And in that quiet, fear took root that something bigger had happened, something far more calculated than anyone dared say aloud. By the start of December, something even more unsettling than the disappearance had begun to settle in nothing. No message, no footage, no list of demands. The Merkava the Four had gone dark, and the silence that followed was absolute. In hostage cases, the rules are grim but predictable. The captors want something, and eventually they reach out. But this time, nothing came. No signal from Gaza, no statement from Hamas or Islamic Jihad, no video of blindfolded soldiers, no tank trophy wheeled through city streets, just a blank space where noise should have been. Israel's intelligence services, Shin Bet, AMAN, Mossad, turned the region upside down. Phone intercepts were mined, informants were activated, ground assets were sent into high-risk zones. Mossad briefed the Prime Minister with a single conclusion: there is no chatter. Not low, not encrypted, none. The digital silence wasn't just improbable, it was impossible. Something this large, this sensitive, should have left a trace. But every known group disavowed involvement. Privately, officials began to fear a new kind of adversary, one that didn't operate like insurgents, but like ghosts. Satellite scans were ordered across every possible corridor the tank could have traveled. The resolution was razor-sharp down to 2 inches per pixel. Entire stretches of terrain were digitally reconstructed. But the analysis kept coming back the same. No anomalies. No buried metal signatures. No movement in the right time window. Not even heat remnants. It was as if the tank had been pulled underground or erased in place. Inside the IDF, frustration turned inward. The chain of command had begun to buckle under pressure. A brigadier was quietly moved into retirement. 2 senior logistics officers reassigned without notice. The platoon that had last seen Eitan's crew was rotated to reserve status, their interviews sealed under military gag orders. Officially, these were routine operational restructurings. Off the record, it was something closer to damage control. Rumors swirled inside Defense HQ, whispers about compromised equipment, faulty software patches, even the possibility that parts of the tank's communication system had been tampered with before deployment. But there were no smoking guns, only missing pieces. And in a place like Israel, where answers are expected quickly, the absence of any truth had begun to rot from within. The Merkava 4 was gone. The crew was gone. And now, the story itself was being pulled into the same void, a blackout so total it didn't just hide the truth, it swallowed it. For nearly 12 months, there was nothing. The case had cooled to a low, painful simmer, a mystery shelved in the archives of unsolved military incidents. But on a cloudless morning in September 2024, that silence cracked. Near the Negev border, in a dry ravine littered with wind-worn stones and scraps of rusted fencing, a Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat stumbled across something half buried in the dirt: a scorched combat helmet. The burn pattern was strange, heat-blistered on one side, intact on the other. The inside smelled faintly of oil, char, and dust. The man didn't hesitate. He brought it to the nearest IDF outpost, 60 kilometers away, and handed it to the guards without a word. Within hours, the object was in a sterile lab in Tel HaShomer. Serial numbers had been melted away, but traces of sweat-stained fabric under the liner were sent for DNA testing. The results came back 48 hours later. A match. Sergeant Niv Halevi Aitan's gunner. The last person to fire the Merkava's 120 mm cannon. The last person known to have worn that helmet. The news detonated across military channels. Someone or something had moved the tank or its crew south, nearly 100 kilometers from the original disappearance zone. Theories reignited overnight. Had they been marched across the desert in secret? Held underground? Transported piece by piece? For the first time in a year, the possibility that one or more of the crew might still be alive crept back into the conversation. The IDF wasted no time. Operation Echo was reactivated under a new designation, Echo Resurrected. This time, the focus shifted below ground. Engineers, geologists, and special operations teams were pulled into the task force. Dozens of sites were flagged: old smuggling corridors, defunct wells, abandoned bunkers. A heat map was built. Tunnels were mapped with seismic sensors and micro-drone scouts. For the families, the clue offered a sliver of something they hadn't dared feel in months: hope. But behind every hopeful whisper was a colder question. If this was Niv's helmet, where was the rest of him? Beneath the sand and stone of southern Israel and northern Sinai lies a second world, one of darkness, concrete, and war. Smugglers, militants, even traffickers have carved out hundreds of kilometers of underground arteries over the last 2 decades. Most are known, some are mapped, but not all. And it was into this unseen realm that Operation Echo Resurrected now turned its gaze. Military analysts had always suspected that if the tank hadn't been destroyed, it had been hidden. But hidden where? You don't drive a 65-ton armored vehicle into a tunnel without leaving scars, unless you built the tunnel around it. A heat anomaly triggered the first lead. A thermal drone, flying low over the edge of the Sinai border zone, caught an unusual burst of heat near an abandoned phosphate quarry. A spot long thought empty, its mining operations shuttered since 1991. For years it had been used as a makeshift dumping ground. Nothing strategic, nothing watched. Until now. Recon teams were sent in under cover of night. The perimeter was clear. No signs of recent human movement. But something about the quarry didn't add up. A pile of collapsed rubble had settled in ways that suggested artificial tampering. Engineers brought in ground-penetrating radar. At a depth of nearly 5 meters, metallic signatures began to form. Dense, curved, manufactured. The shape was unmistakable. Track segments. The dig was careful, methodical. Shovels before machines. Silence before announcements. 3 days later, they uncovered what no one had dared to hope for. A portion of Merkava the Fourth treads, rusted and partially sheared, embedded in hardened clay. The tank, or at least part of it, had been here. How it got there was still unclear. But its presence changed everything. This wasn't destruction. This was concealment. Planned, intentional, and patient. The kind of operation that takes time, resources, and knowledge of terrain, not the hallmarks of a rogue militant group, but something more organized. As the excavation continued, the quarry's silence seemed to grow heavier. If the Merkava was buried here, what else had been sealed beneath this desert tomb? And if someone had gone to such lengths to hide it, what were they so desperate to keep hidden? On the morning of April 3, 2025, the digging team finally hit something solid. The metallic thud was unmistakable, not stone, not rebar, but heavy armor plating. What emerged from beneath the sand and debris wasn't wreckage. It was a survivor, covered in layers of camouflage netting, faded tarps, and a thick crust of wind-blown grit. The upper chassis of a Merkava 4 slowly came into view. The tank was buried nose down, concealed beneath 6 feet of dirt, rock, and carefully positioned sandbags. This wasn't battlefield chaos. It was a burial deliberate, strategic, and silent. The location sent shockwaves through Israeli command. 15 kilometers west of Rafah, deep inside Egyptian territory. The site was far beyond the IDF's official search radius, across a border that had, until now, been considered geopolitically off-limits for any real operation. Egyptian authorities were notified quietly, and through unofficial channels, a temporary corridor was opened under mutual silence. No press, no announcement. What they found was as haunting as it was perplexing. The tank was largely intact, no blast damage, no penetration marks. The tracks were severed, as if removed elsewhere and reassembled here. The engine was cold but not stripped. Electronics had been disabled at the source, wires cleanly cut, not scavenged, but silenced. And most disturbing of all, the crew compartments had been gutted. The seats were gone, control consoles removed. Every surface inside had been wiped down, scrubbed of fingerprints, DNA, identity. But even in its sterile state, the Merkava told a story. Marks on the inner turret wall suggested repeated entry and exit. The hatch bolts were stripped from overuse. Whoever had hidden the tank had returned again and again. For what purpose? No one knew. Not yet. The tank was loaded onto a military flatbed under cover of night. Drone overwatch tracked every kilometer of its return to Israeli soil. It wasn't just about recovering a lost asset. It was about confronting a question no one wanted to ask. Who had hidden it and why? They opened the hatch expecting nothing. What they found was worse. Inside the recovered Merkava 4, the air was still stale and thick with the faint scent of burned plastic and engine oil. Floodlights revealed an interior that felt less like a vehicle and more like a sealed room abandoned in panic. The crew's personal gear was gone. No uniforms, no packs. But the signs of life remained. A pile of charred MRE wrappers sat in the loader's corner, partially melted into the floor. A used water pouch clung to the metal wall with brittle duct tape. Someone had written on the interior paint in grease pencil short phrases in Hebrew, most illegible. One stood out. Hold 4 days. No reply. Door still locked. Beneath it, a hash-marked calendar. 11 tallies. Then nothing. Blood was found under the commander's seat, soaked into the floor grates. Not enough for a fatal wound, but enough to confirm injury. Next to the main hatch, lodged deep in the metal seam, was a single dog tag bent, scorched. It belonged to Private Dortsur, the driver. His name was still visible, his body wasn't. Weapon racks remained untouched. An M4 rifle with no magazine, an empty pistol holster. But the data core, the encrypted hard drive that stores every internal recording, every movement, every command input, was gone. Cleanly extracted, not broken, removed. Forensics found fingerprint smudges. Not one matched the missing crew. None were in any military or criminal database. Whoever had entered the tank after its disappearance had taken their time and taken what they came for. And they'd done it carefully, surgically. The implications spread through IDF intelligence like smoke. Someone had studied the Merkava 4 from the inside for weeks, maybe months. Not for propaganda, not to destroy it, but to learn. The system logs were wiped, the safeties overridden. Whatever had happened inside that tank had been controlled and cold. One investigator muttered what others wouldn't say aloud. This wasn't a hijack. It was a harvest. And still, the central question loomed unanswered. If the tank was here, where were the men who rode inside it? They found the message behind the loader's panel, scrawled hastily in black grease pencil, half faded from time and heat. They're not who we thought. It was written in Hebrew, the lettering shaky but urgent. The rest of the sentence had been wiped or smeared, as if someone had tried to erase it and changed their mind halfway through. It was the first real voice from inside the missing tank, a whisper from a crew that had vanished into the dirt a year earlier, and it changed everything. Investigators reassembled the timeline. The food remnants, the water pouch, the marks inside the hull. They weren't just signs of concealment, they were signs of captivity. The calendar of tallies, the missing hard drive, the stripped comms, the scrawled warning. It all pointed to the same horrifying theory. The crew hadn't been killed in action. They'd been taken and held. For how long, no one could say. Weeks, months. The crew may have been forced to live inside the tank, or nearby, under constant control. What for? The answer was becoming disturbingly clear. The Merkava 4 was one of the most advanced battle tanks in the world, and someone had used its crew to unlock it from within. External inspection added to the weight of the theory. The tank had not been fired. The barrel was clean. No soot, no discharge markings. The fire control computer had been manually disabled, not damaged in combat. Even the armor showed no impact signatures, no signs of RPG hits, no shrapnel scars. This wasn't a battlefield loss. The tank had been commandeered, moved, and buried. Not by chance, with intent. The narrative had shifted again. What began as a disappearance, then a mystery, had become something else. A hostage situation buried under politics, distance, and silence. And while the Merkava had been recovered, the crew had not. The message left behind, "They're not who we thought," suggested betrayal or deception. Someone the crew trusted or expected to recognize had turned out to be something else entirely. And in that reversal, the men had disappeared not in a moment, but piece by piece. The leak broke 2 weeks after the tank's recovery. A foreign affairs correspondent published a story citing anonymous Mossad sources. Fragments of the Merkava 4's fire control software had been sold on the black market. The buyers? Not insurgent groups or lone hackers, but state-backed intermediaries with deep pockets and colder agendas. While the report was immediately discredited in public by the Defense Ministry, behind closed doors it triggered a quiet emergency. Cybersecurity teams initiated Protocol Black Box, a top-to-bottom review of all Merkava 4 deployments. Training programs were paused, upgrades accelerated. Software patches, once scheduled for next year, were now being rushed into every operational unit. Something had been compromised. The question was, how much and by whom? Evidence was thin but precise. A portion of ballistic prediction algorithms unique to Israel's tank targeting system had surfaced in a code dump captured by a Mossad-linked asset in Eastern Europe. It was partial, fragmented, but recognizable. Someone had reverse-engineered components that were never supposed to leave secure servers, let alone end up in the hands of non-allied militaries. The timing wasn't coincidental. All signs pointed back to the hidden tank. Somewhere during its year off-grid, someone had gained prolonged access to its systems. Not to destroy them, to study them. And now, those learnings were beginning to surface in quiet places. A new foreign tank prototype using unfamiliar angular armor, a targeting protocol that mimicked Merkava's split-second response time, a battlefield drone that reacted faster than it should have. The suspected buyers were never officially named. But every analyst knew who they were: regional powers with territorial ambitions, states who had spent years trailing behind Israel's defense technology and would have paid dearly to close the gap. The implications were catastrophic. It wasn't just a leak, it was a doctrinal fracture. Everything the IDF thought was secure had to be reconsidered. War plans were rewritten, training manuals revised. And through it all, the silence of the missing crew echoed louder than any explosion. The Merkava had come home, but something far more dangerous had slipped away with it: knowledge. And knowledge, in the wrong hands, has its own armor-piercing consequences. By the end of 2025, the desert had given up its machine, but not its men. Captain Eitan Lavi, once the steel-eyed commander of a Merkava 4, remained missing. No confirmed sightings. No intercepted signals. No body. Just a name, now etched into classified reports and whispered through corridors where no one spoke above a hush. His parents in Beersheba still lit a candle every Friday night. His younger brother kept Eitan's boots by the door polished, waiting. Hope had become ritual, grief a habit. The IDF issued its final statement on the recovery in October. Carefully worded, tactically vague. The incident involving the temporary loss of an armored unit has been resolved. The case concerning the crew remains under investigation. Due to ongoing national security considerations, further details are classified. No mention of captivity, no comment on the leak, no acknowledgement of the message scrawled inside the hull, just a clean, bureaucratic silence. But those who had touched the case, who had walked the sands near Wadi al-Shati, who had climbed into the cold belly of the hidden tank, who had read the message on the wall, knew better. The mystery wasn't solved. It had just settled, like dust over the Negev. There were rumors, of course, that Eitan was still alive, that he'd been moved, that a prisoner swap was quietly being negotiated through foreign channels. Others believed he had died months ago and that the truth was simply too destabilizing to release. No one in uniform said it out loud, but it lived behind every stare, every pause in conversation when his name came up. What happened in that year of silence had changed something fundamental, not just in the military, in the doctrine, in the trust. The final image was captured by a drone, part of the secure convoy transporting the tank back across the border. The Merkava 4, weathered, sand-etched, strangely whole, being lowered by crane onto a flatbed as the sun dipped behind the jagged horizon. It looked less like a machine of war and more like a monument, a relic, a tomb. And in that frame, perfect in its stillness, was the only witness to a story no one could fully tell. A story that started with silence and ended the same way. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.